Oh my God, these people are on the loose. It's the libs. So we're going to talk, really simplify what it is that liberals believe. We've got some very stereotypical liberals here. And we want to find out what do they think is the proper role of the government. So again, we're really trying to simplify these huge sets of core beliefs into something simple that we can digest here. So really oversimplified version of the basic beliefs of liberals is we want to start with where are they on that spectrum, right? They want the government to have a larger role. They think that the government should be playing a larger role than it is now. That's because they usually see the government as one of the best solutions to the problems in society. Like, that's what the government's for. When we find a problem, the government can solve that problem. They think that the government needs to be doing a lot more to help people. If they help people, it is going to take higher taxes. And so liberals are typically advocating for higher taxes because they're necessary for the government to have the tools it needs to be able to help more people. And in general, these are kind of the 2 points that we're going to be able to pinpoint differences between liberals and conservatives. In general, liberals are going to advocate for the government to have a much larger role in regulating economic activity. They're going to advocate for the government to have a much smaller role in like regulating morals and private lives. Now, again, this is very oversimplified, but this is two places where liberals would say that they think the government needs to change how it does things. So the government needs to do more to regulate economic activity, but the government needs to do less when it comes to our private lives. Liberals see the government mostly as a tool that they can use to care for and to help people. So they think that the government's like main job needs to be helping people and to be taking care of people that are in like, worse off situations. So their main goal is to emphasize equality, and that's more important than individual freedoms. And so like they're willing to sacrifice some individual freedoms if it helps the government have the ability to help and to care for more people. That's a way that will make people more equal. They think that like government programs are good because government programs tend to like help people like get lifted out of poverty, and that is the way that we make people more equal. And they don't think that the government really needs to be like playing a role in protecting or promoting a certain value set, especially like traditional values. And this is the most important thing right here. What is the fundamental goal of the government? When the government's doing things, it should always be working toward the goal. For liberals, that goal is equality. Even if less freedom is necessary to achieve equality, equality is the goal that the government needs to be pushing for. So they are not too concerned with like protecting individual freedom at all times. What they are concerned with is the government being able to promote equality. And so they'll sacrifice some freedoms if it ends up leading to more equality. Here come the conservatives. All right, they are all here saying the Pledge of Allegiance, ready to tell you all about their main ideas here. So let's take a very oversimplified look at what it is that conservatives believe. For starters, conservatives want the government to have a smaller role. They see the government as like the cause of many of society's problems. A lot of the problems we have is because government has done something wrong. So they think that the government's role should be reduced, that we should have a lot less government in our lives. This is not just to get rid of government, but they have the belief that you are best at taking care of yourself. And so it's important that the government get out of your way. And one of the ways that we'll do that is like if we keep taxes low, people have more of their own money and people know the best way to take care of themselves. So the government should keep taxes low so that people can care for themselves. Conservatives would advocate that the government really needs to reduce its role in regulating economic activity. So they think the government needs to be way less involved in the economy. And that's the reverse of what liberals had thought. On the other hand, here, conservatives are more likely to think that the government should play a larger role in promoting like a set of morals or traditional values. This is where we would flip. The liberals think that the government should be more involved in the economy, and the conservatives think that the government should be less involved in the economy. The liberals think that the government doesn't have any role in promoting morals or value sets or anything, and the conservatives think that is an important role of the government. So conservatives will say that the government's job is to protect your ability to protect yourself, like to protect your ability to care for yourself and your family and all of that. So this is in opposition to where liberals think that the government ought to be taking care of people. The conservatives think the government needs to let you take care of yourself. Their fundamental goal here is going to be freedom. So they're going to emphasize the importance of freedom. And that's more important than equality. So making sure that everyone has individual freedom is a more important goal than making sure everyone is treated equally. When it comes to the government taking care of people, they think that the government, like when it cares for people, that it ends up making people dependent on the state. So when the government is like, especially trying to run a bunch of programs for people in poverty and stuff, they think that creates a weird incentive structure that causes people to rely on the government instead of help themselves. They also think that the government should have an important role in establishing and protecting traditional values. Like traditional values in this country are very important. Things like the family, religion, and speech, and all these kind of issues are things that the government ought to protect. With conservatives, our fundamental goal is freedom. Everything that they're doing is geared toward this goal of freedom. Even if that less equality is going to happen, if less equality is necessary to achieve the goal of freedom, freedom is the goal that we want to focus on. And so these are the very oversimplified basic views of conservatives. All right, before we jump into some of those culture war issues to try to set our liberals and conservatives apart, let's take a quick look at a couple of ideologies that we'll find out on the extremes of our political spectrum. So we want to look at the far right and the far left. On the far right side of things is where we're going to find our like smallest government possible, and that's where we will find a group we call libertarians. So libertarian is an ideology that thinks that the government needs to ensure the maximum level of freedom. They would say that most government services and a lot of government rules are unnecessary, that we would have more freedom if government got out of the way. Often, like, some libertarians are opposed to things like driver's licenses. Like, why would the government have a role in deciding who should drive and who shouldn't be able to drive and things like that? So they want to eliminate as much government control as possible, because the result of that would be a maximum amount of freedom for each individual person to live as they please. Out on the extreme left, the opposite side of the spectrum, wanting maximum government, as much government as possible, we find the commies. The communists, they think that the government needs to do whatever it takes to make all people equal, particularly economically equal. So if in order to do that, we have to eliminate many freedoms, especially economic freedom, then that's worth it if it achieves the goal of making all people equal. So they would think that a maximum amount of government is possible. And that might even include, like, the government tells you where to work and how much you get paid and what things you can own and all that kind of stuff. So communism would be our far left ideology in opposition to libertarianism, our far right ideology. All right, so we're going to go through and compare liberal and conservative attitudes on just a few of those culture war issues, so we can kind of all be on the same page and have some idea of what liberals and conservatives think about the kinds of issues that people get really fired up over. Okay, so just another way of thinking about some of the things that we already said is that liberals would say that they hold progressive values. And what that means is that they want to see a lot of changes in society. They think that the government can help make a lot of these changes happen. They think that the government has a big role to play in improving society. On the other hand, conservatives are going to say that they hold traditional values. They're going to want to keep things the way they are, or we might say they want to maintain the status quo. They think that it's up to individuals to take responsibility to help themselves improve their own standing and work hard. And so the government needs to get out of people's way so that they can do that. Let's remember our fundamental goals here. So, what is the goal of the whole thing? Why is the state doing what it's doing? For liberals, that is because the government needs to be prioritizing equality in all of its decision making. All of its decisions need to be about finding ways to improve equality in the country. And for conservatives, the government needs to be prioritizing freedom. All the decisions that the government's making need to be in ways that maximize the amount of individual freedoms that we have. And that way we're better able to take care of ourselves. So as we go through issues, let's start with taxes. We've talked about this a little bit already. For liberals, they think that we need higher taxes, especially on the rich. By taxing the rich people at high rates, they're able to redistribute wealth to people in need. So they think that the rich people need to be contributing their fair share. That people are rich because they got rich because of like the help and labor of other people. And so taxes are one of the best ways that we can redistribute the wealth from the wealthiest Americans to those Americans that need it the most. Conservatives, on the other hand, are going to say that the government needs to allow you to keep the money that you made working. That the government should like charge lower taxes because that way you have more of your own money. When you have more of your own money, you're better able to take care of yourself and you don't need the government to take care of you. They would also argue that taxes discourage economic growth. When taxes are high, people don't necessarily want to like invest because that money will just be taxed anyway. And so they would say that taxes discourage economic growth. When we take a look at poverty, liberals think that poverty is a systemic problem and that society, like the way the society is structured, causes a lot of problem that causes poverty for large groups of people. So they think the government's role is to fix these systemic problems. The government needs to help those people in poverty. And the best way to help them is to provide them more social services. If it's things like childcare or like nutrition assistance or healthcare or all sorts of different stuff, the government needs to be providing more services to people living in poverty. On the other hand, conservatives would say that poverty is most often the result of like work ethic and individual choices. That people that are living in poverty have made wrong choices or aren't willing to work to get out of poverty. They think that social services encourage people to be dependent on the government. And we've talked about that a little already. So when the government gives a bunch of services to people, they're actually not helping people at all. They're making them dependent on the government instead of teaching those people to work hard and help themselves. The other side of things, it's not that conservatives don't want to help poorer people. It's that conservatives think that like when the government does it, that means that like charities and stuff are not going to do it, right? Like if the government is attempting to solve this problem, then we don't need like independent groups and charities to step in and solve that problem. And they would feel that like charity groups, religious organizations and things like that do a better job of helping people living in poverty than the government does. All right, so we'll go through some culture war issues real quick. First of all, our biggest culture war issue would be abortion. Liberals tend to be what we call pro-choice. They would argue that women have the right to make their own decisions about their own health care and their own bodies. They would say that restricting abortions restricts the rights of women to make choices. This is kind of where we would say where this would fit into what liberals were saying about how they think the government doesn't really have a role in promoting values or getting involved in people's private lives. Conservatives are going to be most likely be what we call pro-life. They're most likely to say that the embryo in the womb should have the same protections as any person. And so if the government allows abortion or places provide abortion services, that the government is allowing the murder of people before they are born. And so this kind of fits in with where conservatives are more willing to promote traditional values and maybe get involved a little bit in regulation of private life. When we talk about guns, the liberals would be on the side of the government needing to do more to restrict gun ownership. They would argue that that even though you're taking away people's individual freedom to own guns, you are providing like a more equality in the realm of like safety in society. Conservatives, on the other hand, like they prioritize individual freedom. So they think people should be able to own weapons to defend themselves. They think that it's actually dangerous for the government to have, the only guns. That if the government had a monopoly on gun ownership, that we wouldn't have any ability to defend ourselves against government tyranny. When we talk about gay rights, liberals are likely to argue that the government needs to enforce equal protection of the law in a way that focuses on sexual orientation, that the government needs to do more to protect the rights of people in minority groups, including minority sexual orientation groups. So the LGBTQ community is going to need the government to take an active role in protecting them. Conservatives are more likely to advocate that the government should be playing a role in promoting traditional morals instead. They would argue that people's religious beliefs have to be protected, and that if part of people's religious beliefs are a feeling that homosexuality is immoral, then people's religious beliefs to both believe and practice that should be protected by the state. When it's time to talk about immigration, liberals are likely to argue that immigrants are valuable and that they enrich America's culture, that they are valuable to America's economy, and they promote economic growth. They're going to say that the government has a role in encouraging immigration and that the government needs to protect the immigrant communities that are here in the United States because makes America have a more diverse and rich culture and a more healthy economy. Conservatives are more likely to argue to focus on illegal immigration and to say that illegal immigrants hurt America's economy. They drain services and they compete with working class Americans. So they would argue that immigrants that are here illegally are taking job opportunities from America's working classes. This is one of the ways that the government is causing problems of poverty, is that the government is not enforcing its laws that it has on the books. So the government needs to strictly enforce immigration laws, and the government needs to attempt to remove illegal immigrants from the community. Even the military takes on a culture war kind of issue here, and liberals are more likely to say that the United States needs to focus on international cooperation and diplomacy. They need to work with other countries to find solutions to problems. Liberals are going to say that military spending is way too high in the United States, that we put too much money in the military, and that money could be used to solve a lot of these problems inside the country. On the other hand, conservatives will argue that the United States needs a very strong military. That's the way that we protect not just Americans, but our interests all over the world. They would say that, the strong military is the reason that we have these important freedoms, and that should be a priority of the government, that the military should, in fact, military spending could even be increased, and that would lead to more safety in America. So liberals are going to be less likely to want to use the military, and conservatives are going to be more likely to think of the military as a tool to protect United States interests. And drug use would be another one of those culture war issues. So liberals are more likely to see drug use as a victimless crime and think that the government's priorities need to be enforcing other kinds of laws, and that the government does not need to be worrying a whole lot about illegal drug use in the United States, that we should not be harshly punishing people who are nonviolent drug offenders. But conservatives would argue that drug use is a threat to the community. Drug use, drug trafficking especially, is a source of crime. So there are victims to this crime. This does tear communities apart, and this is a place where the government should act. Conservatives would argue that the government should strictly enforce drug laws, and they should punish people because punishment serves as a deterrent from using drugs and trafficking in drugs. All right, that is a lot, but we are just kind of introducing our two main ideologies here, and we've got, of course, a lot of issues to talk about, and we'll continue to do that a lot more. Let's take a quick look at our bigly ideas from today. All right, the first thing we got to make sure we can do is that we've got to understand the difference between ideology and party. Even though they're very similar in today's politics, it'll be up to you to explain how ideology is different from party affiliation. Remember, ideology is a set of ideas. It's ideas about what the government should do, and the party is more about who should run the government. We want to be able to describe the political spectrum in the United States. Think of that bell curve from smallest government to most government. Think of where we would find liberals and conservatives. Think of where we would find people on the extremes. We want to be able to describe the main ideas of liberals, and it's okay to, to oversimplify things. And we're going to be asked to write things about, like, what would liberals think about this? What would conservatives think about that? So we want to be able to describe the stances of liberals about different policies. We want to be able to do the same thing with conservatives. Like, can we say what their main goals are? Can we say what they think about the government or what they think about different issues? And finally, we want to be able to describe those factors that impact political socialization. We want to figure out, how did you get your political opinions? All right, and that's it for our first little part of Unit 4. We figured out all the things we need to know about political ideology. Now we're going to move on and talk about, like, the different parts of America, like who makes up America and how they participate. So we've got a good idea moving forward when we start to look at the policies in the country.